What's up, everybody? Tim Anderson here, aka Renfail, the bearded dwarven princess, because as we know, all dwarves have beards. That's true. It is true. Don't let other people fool you. All the dwarves in Tolkien's world of Middle-earth have beards, including the women, who cannot be distinguished from the men. Therefore, in any case, welcome to the latest episode of Mondays in Middle-earth, as I have been reading through The Hobbit, The Lord of the Rings, and The Silmarillion, ahead of, in anticipation of, and for the mocking of The Rings of Power, which so far hasn't really shown me that it's going to be anything other than mock-worthy. Could be wrong. There's always a chance that it could be really, really good. Let's wait and see. Maybe, perhaps. In any case, today we are wrapping up the Fellowship of the Ring. We are down to the last two chapters, the Great River and the Breaking of the Fellowship, chapters 9 and 10 of Book 2 in the Fellowship of the Ring. Now, if you haven't already done so, you can check out the previous episodes in this series in the playlist and catch up on all of the previous sections. And of course, there's a Discord channel. Don't forget to check that out in our Discord server. There's a channel set up just to talk about this. Episodes come out every Monday at 11 a.m. Central. So hopefully you'll stick around, watch the future ones. And if you're new here, if you haven't already done so, make sure to hit that subscribe button, like the video, hit the bell icon, all those things so you get updates for future episodes in this series. Check out the playlists beyond, and hopefully you'll feel inspired to support me as a content creator. If you like what you hear today, drop a super thanks on the video. It's a great way to buy me a cup of coffee or whatever tier you feel comfortable. You can drop $2, $3, $10, whatever you want to. You can also join as a member of the Adventurers Guild. It's down there. There's some cool perks for being a member here on YouTube, and of course, don't forget, you can always join our Patreon page, which we'll talk about towards the end of the episode because we have our own fantastical world of the Weave and the Void that we're working on. I digress, ladies and gentlemen. Let's talk about today's read through. So, for those of you who have been around for a while, obviously one of the big things for me as I've been going back and reading through this for the first time in 20 years is taking advantage of the internet and researching things and finding things out that I didn't necessarily know 20 years ago, and I didn't have access to the internet 20 years ago like it exists today. So a lot of stuff that I just kind of took for granted, I'm able to now go out and do greater research about. There's been more books published, there's more experts, there's more opinions. The internet is a great big place. Um, Obviously, some of this stuff some of the things I've been reading are things I forgot, and then just because it's been 20 years looking at like the films, which I've definitely watched every year since they came out. Excuse me, so it's going on 20 years now with the films as well. Um, there's some things that I just had kind of forgotten about the books entirely in favor of the movie versions. So it's been really good to go back and read through and go, oh, I had forgotten about that, or oh, they did that part really well, or hey, that line of dialogue actually shows up in the third film, not the first one, that kind of stuff. So it's been kind of interesting. In any case, Chapter 9, The Great River. Um, there's a really cool section of this chapter where each member of the Fellowship is sort of off in their own thoughts, and Tolkien is giving us insight into Gimli's thought process and Legolas's thought process and what's Aragorn thinking and so on and so forth. And we get a moment here where Merry and Pippin are observing Boromir, right? And of course, this is all leading up to what we know happens at the end of this chapter. Um, and as we see Merry and Pippin observing him, he's muttering himself, he's biting his nails, and then he's driving his boat close to Aragorn's with a queer gleam in his eye, it says. So he's back there in his boat, like just rowing, like trying to keep up with Aragorn, and he's just intently focused and he's stressed, he's biting his nails, and obviously something is really eating at this guy. And based on what we already saw in Lothlorien, we know that it's weighing heavily on his heart, the deaths of all the hundreds and thousands of people who could die in Gondor if we don't stop Mordor. And so he's obsessed with this idea that why are we taking the ring? Why? Why are we taking the ring to destroy it? Why aren't we using it? The men of Numenor are strong. That's the Isildur in his brain. Like that's that part of man who says, I can use the ring. I can use it for good. And he's definitely fallen to that. Um, so it's very interesting because we get a glimpse of the other characters noticing this. Sam gets a glimpse of Gollum on the river. He sees something following them, but it ducks away out of his eye viewpoint of view. He and Frodo discuss it, and he's talking about how he sees the log with the two eyes, and he was looking at it, and then it ducked away, and he didn't see it again. He suspects that it's Gollum. He tells this, or he tells this to Frodo, and Frodo says, "Well, I suspect it's Gollum." And then later that night, this is something I completely forgot from the book. Later that night, Frodo's on watch, and he sees Gollum coming up from the river in his little log, and he's creeping up. And there comes a point when Gollum is right there and is looking right at Frodo, and Frodo gets up and pulls Sting, and he goes to confront Gollum. I didn't remember this at all. And as he does so, Gollum looks around and realizes that everyone's here, and he flees, right? He runs away. And at this time, Aragorn wakes up and says, "What's going on?" And Frodo tells him, and he goes, "Oh, you know about our little footpad, do you? I've been trying to catch him at nights, but he's slyer than a fox and as slippery as a fish." But Aragorn has definitely known about Gollum for quite some time, and he's been trying to capture him at night, which brings into question, not into question, but it brings into play the fact that, remember Aragorn and Gandalf tracked Gollum for many, 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 many years, and they only caught him after he had been released from Mordor and was on his way back, and probably may have been disoriented, who knows. But Gollum is good enough in the wilds that he can keep away from Aragorn, which is pretty impressive considering Aragorn is like one of the best trackers and an outdoorsman of like master level. And he literally says that Gollum is slyer than a fox and as slippery as a fish. We also get to the point here where they're trying to go down this river and they're getting to the rapids and they know that it's going to be dangerous, and Aragorn is mentioning how they're going to have to pull the boats out and go along the side and carry the boats. Again, something that's not talked about in the films at all. But they're so intent on making good time, um, they're sticking to it. And then in the middle of the night, as they're going down, they hit the rapids in the middle of the night. And as they're attempting to break free of the rapids, all hell breaks loose and they get attacked by orcs shooting arrows at them as they're like floundering in these rapids and trying to like get to shore and everything else. So there's this panicked scene here, which is really cool for one reason. But there's this panic scene as they're trying to get their boats out of the river and they're being shot at the whole time, and they're trying to get to the opposite shore. And then as they get there, the way that it's framed is so cool. And I wished they would have had this in the movie, because the way it's written in the book, and look at my notes here, it's such an epic scene because it says that Frodo looks up at Legolas. So he's literally pulling his boat to the shore and he looks up, and there's Legolas standing above him and gazing into the night, seeking a mark to shoot at. And as he does, he whispers, "Alberth Gilthoniel," as a dark shape, like a cloud and yet not a cloud, for it moved too swiftly, came out of the blackness of the south, and sped towards the company, blotting out all light as it approached. Soon it appeared as a great winged creature, blacker than the pits of night, and Frodo's wound pained him. So it's this at this point that, basically we know what this is. This is a Nazgul. Frodo's like, "Oh, my shoulder." And as he does this, Legolas fires his brand new bow that he got from Lorien. And they say there's a harsh, choking scream that comes out of the air as the creature falls to the opposite shore. And there is then a cursing and wailing of voices from the darkness, followed by silence for the rest of the night. So Legolas is like big black shape, pew, shoots it. It falls into the opposite shore. We've obviously taken out the one of the winged creatures that they ride, but as we know, Nazgul themselves aren't that easy to disperse. Frodo suspects what the creature is, but refuses to voice his fears. Um, and this is a really cool segment here, which I'd completely forgotten. It's not in the films. Sam notices the moon, the phase of the moon, and he's upset because he can't reckon the time that they spent in the forest of Galadriel in Lothlorien. And he's sitting here going, "We spent X amount of days, and yet the moon acts like it looks like it did just a, it looks like the moon is the same as it was when we went in, because we've only passed 1 or 2 days at this point, or a couple of days on the river. So the moon only looks like it's a couple days beyond what it was like before they entered into Lothlorien, and yet they were in Lothlorien for several days. I don't remember if it says exactly how many days they're there, but it's enough that Sam picks up on it and goes, something's not working here, and he questions. Um, does time not pass within the forest the way it does in the outside world? And this is where Legolas actually confirms that, and I didn't remember this at all. But basically, um, the elves live in this because of their immortality, but also because of the magic of Lothlorien and the magic of the elves themselves. They're basically in this little bubble where the real world doesn't affect them the way it does the mortal world, if that makes sense. Like time doesn't affect them the same way it does the rest of the mortals. So they're in this bubble where if you're in the magic of the bubble, the world is passing on around you, which is a very, very interesting way of looking at the magic of elves. Lots of stuff we could theorize about that. Maybe might have a discussion about that one day. I'd love to know more. Um, we also get to the point here where they're starting to need to make a decision on where to go, and Boromir basically gets all cranky and puts his foot down and says he's going to accompany them as far as Tendrock, but no further. He says, "If my help has not earned the reward of any companionship, I will be on my way by myself and go back to Minas Tirith." Basically, he's getting very frustrated with the fact that Aragorn is refusing to make up his mind about which path to take, and Aragorn is trying to put that decision off for as long as possible because he's stressed because of the loss of Gandalf, and his heart is torn because he knows what needs to be done, but he doesn't want to leave Frodo and Sam and etc. And he's very stressed about things here. Um, and ultimately, Aragorn wants Frodo to make the decision, but Boromir does put his foot down, and he's very cranky at this point. He's just like, "No, I'm not going any further. I'm going to go to here, and that's it. And if you're not going to come with me to Minas Tirith, then I'm going to go home alone and screw you all because none of you are actually my friends." There's another part of the book here that the movie completely skipped over, which is the fact that Aragorn and Legolas go out and scout the edges of the bank to find this old portageway along the western shore to carry the boats down because they could no longer use the river because they were in these the rapids and so these cliffs and everything else. Then they finally get down back into the boats, and there's this epic scene when they're passing through the Argonath, and it's like the rushing of water, and it's really intense and somewhat dangerous. And Sam gets panicked. Like Sam is full on in panic mode about being on a boat, and he's starting to break down mentally. And it's really cool the way this is written, because basically it's Frodo looking up. It says, "Fear not," says a strange voice behind him. Frodo turned and saw Strider, and yet not the Strider, for Aragorn, the ranger, was no longer there. In the stern sat Aragorn, son of Arathorn, proud and direct, guiding the boat with skillful strokes, his hood cast back, his dark hair blowing in the wind, a light in his eyes, a king returning from exile to his own land. So this is not the Aragorn that we get from the films, obviously. The Aragorn in the films is much more subdued. He's very nervous. He's kind of scared. And it's not until later on when he decides to pick up the Palantir and confront Sauron, and that's sort of towards, that's in Return of the King, if I remember correctly, in that film. But here we have Aragorn is very much, proactive about his approach of taking on Sauron, and the way it's phrased of him standing up at the stern of the boat, like just he's just rowing the boat and his hair's blowing in the wind and you see a light in his eyes and he looks like a king of old, like he's at the stern of the boat, and it's a really cool scene the way it's written. Um, Chapter 10, there's not a lot to talk about here in the Breaking of Fellowship because this is the big chapter, but also this chapter is fairly accurate in the films as well. The biggest scene here is obviously Boromir and his whole rant against Frodo and trying to take the ring from Frodo. What I had forgotten was the fact that Boromir's death scene isn't actually in this book. Um, it's been so long since I've read this. The chapter ends with the breaking of the Fellowship. But anyway, um, there is a huge section here where Boromir rants at Frodo, and that's not in the film. Like we get the gist of what's going on in Boromir's head in the film. It was obviously very much more concise in the film. But here we've got, you know, paragraphs and paragraphs of dialogue because Boromir is really trying to convince Frodo, and his arguments are sound. Like his arguments are not weak arguments; they're really good arguments. But Frodo, of course, is saying, man cannot stand against the power of the ring. Look at you; you're already starting to feel it, and eventually it gets to the point where Frodo has said no so many times that Boromir loses control of himself and he tries to take the ring. And that's when Frodo puts on the ring and runs off. And this is where, oh, again, Frodo has more visions because he likes to have visions. As he's sitting on the summit of Aman Hin, He sees all of the armies of Mordor, and not directly, but basically he's looking out and he's looking across all the corners of the land while he's wearing the ring, and he's seen smoke and flame in every direction that he looks. Armies coming out of Misty Mountain, flames over the land of Bjorn, um, boats in Harad, and all this other stuff. And while his heart is filled with hope for a moment when he sees the white towers, in the white city of Minas Tirith, his eye is drawn east and he gets the great eye. And this is when there's a thing inside of him. Take it off. And so he quickly takes off the ring, and he says he feels as if this shadow passed overhead, which is basically Sauron's hand was reaching out because he felt the presence of the ring, and he was, "Where are you? Where are you?" And then Frodo took it off at just the right moment, and so it passed overhead and went away. Um, we go back to the campfire, and it's been too long. Boromir comes back. He doesn't tell them what happened, but he does say that Frodo put on the ring and disappeared. And then everybody just starts to run off in different directions looking for Frodo, and this is when Aragorn panics. And we also get the epic sort of relationship between Sam and Frodo here, because as Sam is following Aragorn, he's like, "Wait a minute, Sam." And by the way, I just played through this in Lord of the Rings Online, and they did it very well because Sam literally gets this ability. You're doing session play as Sam, and he gets ability. I think it's called Hobbit Sense, and you click it, and he's like, "Wait a second, Frodo." He'd need supplies. Like he would have to go back to the boats, and so obviously Sam goes back to the boats, and that's when he sees an empty boat sliding off into but paddling itself, and he realizes it's Frodo on the boat. And so we end this book with um, Sam joining his master in the boat, and they decide that they're going off to Mordor alone, and that's it. I did not remember that being the ending of this book. So, I mean, I'm gonna open my Kindle real quick. Because in the films, it's slightly more. The end of the first book is slightly different. Like we're more in the Two Towers. Um, Yeah, chapter one of the Two Towers is called The Departure of Boromir, so that's when we're gonna get the spoiler alert, the death scene. Anyway, that's the end of the Fellowship of the Ring, everybody. Finally made it through the first book. We've got two more books to go, and as I recall, The Two Towers is my favorite book out of all of them, but it's been a long time since I've read them. But I do remember this being my favorite book, so we're gonna dive in and read more. Hopefully you enjoyed this. If you did, do me a solid, like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon to get updates for future content, and please drop a super thanks. It's a great way to support me as a content creator, just like you support Hulu and HBO Plus and Paramount Plus and Disney Plus and HBO Max and all those other channels. Support your favorite content creators. Buy me a cup of coffee. Just choose your super thank amount. It'd be awesome if you did so. Thank you so much in advance. And of course, you can also join as a member of the Adventurers Guild down below. It's $3 a month. There's also, if you want to go above and beyond, Patreon page for the World of the Weave and the Void, which is our own fantastical world. It is a 5th edition tabletop setting. The books, or the book, I should say, the setting module, the setting and the first module dropped on May 31st, so you can get those books today. You can also download the free demo to our point-and-click adventure game, which is called An Adventurer's Tale, all on the Patreon page. And of course, there's also a book series, because you got to have a book series. Chapter 20 is about to be published this upcoming Thursday. Check all that stuff out over at patreon.com/wandering hermits. Wandering hermits being myself, my brother, and my wife. We've also got Nathan Napalm working with us, and Becca via Sparrow and Bounty Code. Some of our friends helping out with artwork and stuff. So hopefully you'll check that stuff out. Super thanks, join all those good things. Join our Discord, links are down below. And of course, I stream almost every single day, so hopefully I'll see you on one of my live streams. Stay safe, everybody. Happy reading. Get ready, because we're coming back with the Two Towers in the next episode. Cheers, everyone.